So here we are in our first webinar of the PRELIM Serbia course. We're going to go into part 2 now and learn a little bit more about contemporary English from our trainer, Claire. So Claire, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Really nice to see you, inverted commas. Nice that you've been able to join us this evening from well, we're in a very damp and murky Cambridge, but as Christina said, no heavy snow at the moment, but it's on its way, I believe. A little bit about myself. I'm going to keep it very brief because we've got a lot of content to get through this evening in the first part of my session. I've been a teacher of English as a foreign language since 1987. I've been a teacher trainer since 1994. I've been working at Bell Cambridge since 1994, and I've known my colleague Liz Harrison ever since then. It's lovely to work on a course with her yet again. We together have been running courses on contemporary English for about 15 years, I would say. And a little bit about my interest. I've always been really interested in words. My parents were both teachers, and from a young age I was encouraged to play Scrabble, the board game. You probably know it. Nowadays I play more a game which is very similar on an app, 2 words. And professionally, I have worked in various guises for many, many years for Cambridge Assessment English as an examiner, as a marker. Now I do a little bit of writing, seminars and items for exams, and it's just down the road for me anyway, so it's a handy employer. I want to say a little bit about contemporary English very briefly before we move on to some examples. We should perhaps first ask ourselves, what is contemporary English? And I think the natural tendency is to say, oh, it's just a whole bunch of new words and phrases. But, well, it is to a large extent, but there are other aspects to consider. And this is indeed what our course will be investigating over the next 5 weeks. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on to the next slide and take a look at some examples of contemporary language. So we have here a selection of vocabulary items. In a moment, you're going to go into breakout rooms again. And I'd like you, when you get in the breakout room, to think about meaning. What do these mean? And think also about what is significant about these vocabulary items. We're going to give you a little time to get into breakout and discuss.
Yes, I think we'll have about 5 minutes to discuss in the breakout rooms.
To make it easier for me, Claire and Liz, if you can just come out of the rooms that you're in, that would be easier for me. Give me 1 second.
I don't, am I in a room? Oh,
you will be in a moment.
You will be in a moment.
All right. People are excited to find out what has been voted Word of the Year by Oxford annually. But we also had some items there that were chosen by other big dictionary publishers like Collins and Cambridge. And anyway, the annual winner is deemed to be an item that reflects the ethos, the mood, or the preoccupations of that particular year. And it's also an item that is predicted to have lasting potential as a word of cultural significance. So I think a great example of this, which has endured since 2013, when it was Word of the Year, is the word selfie, which I think in lockdown has had a huge resurgence of popularity. and people are selfieing all over the show every few minutes. And now, of course, we've got Ussie, which is a group selfie. Okay, so the examples that you had there on your slide, they're all examples which have come to prominence in contemporary British society. And not surprisingly, a great many of them are socio-political, or they're words that have come into the public consciousness from ecology and green issues. And there's one in there from online dating, swipe right. We've also got swipe left if you don't fancy someone. And Brexit itself, as a word, has been extremely generous in gifting new items to the English language since 2017. So we had quite a spread then from 2013 selfie word of the year to climate emergency word of the year 2019. What happened last year, 2020? Well, actually, it was quite a phenomenal year for new lexis. And actually, Oxford Dictionary was unable to choose one single word to represent last year because so many lexical items came out of the COVID pandemic. And they, in fact, published a 38-page report on words of the year. And it's really fascinating reading. You can download it for free from the Oxford Dictionary website, the words of the year. It was an unprecedented year in terms of lexical emergence. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay. So, as I said before, I think it's rather dangerous if we just say, well, contemporary English is just new words and phrases. No, it isn't. And here we have, in fact, 6 aspects of contemporary English. And what they illustrate is the fact that we cannot limit contemporary English to vocabulary alone. So while with number 6, we do indeed have a vocabulary example, numbers 1 to 5 here represent some new constructions and new varieties of English. And David Crystal, who is the go-to guy for anything about the English language, the only man worthy of the word guru in my book, David has been talking about Englishes, plural, for a long, long time. And he has lots to say on the ever-changing nature of modern-day English. And this is one of the areas, the themes that is going to run through our course in the next 5 weeks. How and why is English changing? Okay, so let's deal with these items in turn then, please. And let's take number 1 from our list. Oh, okay, now what about you then at weekends? Do you Netflix and chill? This has very interestingly become a new flavor of Ben & Jerry ice cream. It's just there on the tub and it's called Netflix and chill. I mean, God knows what flavor it is. I've never actually gone there, but I think it's a fantastic linguistic phenomenon. Anyway, here we have the Ariel advert. Do you pod? Are you a podder? I'm actually a podder now, although sometimes I revert to washing in liquid. Anyway, what is this trend about? This is an example of denominalization, and that's kind of a mouthful, but it just means turning nouns into verbs. You may also call it verbifying or verbification if you fancy. Now, it's not a new process. It has been around for years. Shakespeare was an early verbifier. It seems to have been adopted by advertisers and so on, because it makes things snappier and fresher, shorter, more dynamic, trendier, more memorable, if you like. Let's take the example of bin. Well, in the good old days, you would put something in the bin, that's 5 words. Nowadays, we bin something, that's 2 words. Okay, this telegraphic style possibly came about because of text messaging and the need to be brief. You used to have to write your Twitter messages in 140 characters, if you remember. So there was a lot of abbreviating going on and a lot of emoticon using going on. And this is a style that has developed, certainly in written English. Brand names have always been a huge source of verbing. We talk about hoovering, Googling, eBaying, Instagramming, Snapchatting, Ubering, and of course what we're doing now, Zooming. Okay, so this is a noticeable trend for sure, and I'm sure you've got lots of other examples. Could we move on to the next item, please? Thank you. Well, we mentioned Ben and Jerry already, and as it says here, they have been committed to great since 78. Well, in the old days, that would have been greatness. So what's happened to the noun ending? Well, maybe this morning you did a bit of Nutellaing. You spread the happy on your toast. This, again, is a linguistic phenomenon which seems to be beloved of advertisers because it's noticeable and it makes people who have any awareness of the English language sit up and think, hang on, what's going on here? There is an adjective being used as a noun. And a very good recent example that we're all living through now is the new normal, where, of course, we've always been used to seeing the word normal as an adjective, as happy and great here, you know. So this convention is a good example of something that is flying in the face of long established grammar rules that state that the definite article, the, has to be followed by a noun. Well, love it or hate it, it seems very likely to be here to stay, especially, as I said, in advertising. Okay. All right. Let's move on then, please, to the next one. In it makes you think, though. In it, well, if we followed the prescriptive grammar rules, we would tag this with doesn't it, wouldn't we? And let's think about the process of forming question tags in English. Standard English question tags involve a very heavy cognitive load. You have to think, you know, positive stem, negative tag, vice versa. You've got to repeat the auxiliary verb in the tag, or if you only have a main verb, you've got to add in do. You've got irregular forms like shall we when you use let's in the stem. You've got the issue of intonation. Is it a real question or is it a checking question? So many languages already have a question tag which is much less grammatically complex than English ones. Think how your mother tongue tags questions. You may tag with the word no and a rising intonation, or maybe by putting the word right at the end. You're Scottish, Claire, no? You're Scottish, right? And both of these are modern replacements for all those complex tags that we have grown up with as standard grammar. Well, what about in it? You know, it's clearly something to do with isn't it, but phonologically it's come to be represented as in it. This is an example of non-standard grammar. And while non-standard grammar may be viewed by many people as wrong or incorrect, or in fact substandard, David Crystal, guru, is keen to point out that it's actually just the grammar of a particular variety. A non-standard variety, a non-standard form, may be geographically based, or it may be typical of a particular certain group of society, like young people, or perhaps people of certain ethnic backgrounds, ethnicities. In it has been described as possibly the question tag of the future, a kind of all-purpose tag. And this is a very good example of language that is being influenced by other varieties of English, those Englishes that David Crystal refers to. In particular, this is an example of what we call multicultural British English, MLE. And we're going to research that further when we look at phonology. In it, used in both statements and questions, is very, very common already in Indian English, Malaysian English, Singaporean English. It may well become standard British English one day. In it. Okay. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. All right. So, what about this? Number 4. Well, what do we think about this? I'm sure lots of people are screaming at the screen going, that's a mistake. Is it a mistake? Well, yes. If we are teaching English as a foreign language, this is what Liz and I teach at the Bell School in Cambridge, EFL. If we teach that, then yes, this is indeed a grammar mistake. And students who wrote this in the Cambridge key or preliminary exams would not get a mark. However, used in the context of ELF, English as a lingua franca, this is perfectly natural and acceptable because English as a lingua franca interactions are all about function rather than form. And let's remember that linguistically speaking, the morpheme S, the little s, carries absolutely no meaning whatsoever. It is purely a grammatical marker. Supporters of ELF, English as a lingua franca, again, this is one of the lessons in the course that's coming up in the next weeks. Supporters of ELF say that third person singular S is not necessary for international intelligibility because, as we've said, the focus of English as a lingua franca interactions is function and not form. So whether you drop your S in a multicultural social situation, the message is still understood. Okay, let's have the next one then, please. Thank you. All right, so I was like, no way. And my mum was like, yes way. Now, this is the quotative like, and it is so called because you're quoting what someone else said. Okay, it's not to be confused with like as a filler, and that's a whole different story. I live with a 17-year-old, and I can tell you that I've never actually heard him use reported speech. Today's young people in the UK, and I suspect in America as well, yeah, they find other ways of reporting. So they can use the verb be like, I was like, and then direct speech. I was like, well, I've got exams. And my teacher was like, well, you're going to have to study. And they also use the word go. My mum goes, tidy your room. And I go, not yet. And so on. Now, some people hate quotative like, and they say it's nasty and it's lazy. But David Crystal calls it, well, a small increase in the expressive richness of English. Where does it come from? It is said to have originated in the San Fernando Valley in California. It is sometimes referred to as Valley Girl dialect. It's been around for more than 30 years, in fact. We do associate it primarily with young people in an informal spoken setting. However, linguists have found that it's now flourishing across a range of registers and dialects. And over the last 25 years, it has certainly become one of English's most widespread methods of talking about talking. And it continues to spread across the globe. Okay, thank you. Let's have our last example then. All right, well, we literally died. No, you didn't. I literally exploded when I heard I got the job. No, you didn't actually. So this is our last one, and it does come back to what we said at the beginning. This is an example of lexis, all right, or vocabulary. This is an example of repurposing. Sometimes it's called conversion of meaning. We can say that as well as repurposing. It's when an existing word that we've had for a long, long time takes on new meaning or new usage. Literally used to mean only what I'm saying is true. And if a word is translated literally, you take it at its most basic meaning. Nowadays, it's come to describe something in a very dramatic way, to overemphasize, to exaggerate. And some careful speakers, you might want to call them pedants, think that this is a mistake and it's another example of bad English. But when we look at corpora, the analysis of bodies of language, corpus analysis, we actually find that literally in its original meaning is only used 38% of times, whereas 62% of its contemporary use is now as emphatic usage. So we can see that there's been a huge explosion then in the use of literally for dramatic emphasis. And it's very common indeed in the speech of younger people, who are literally falling over themselves to use it in every sentence. Okay, so let's go on to our last, my last bit of input perhaps. This is the summary of what we've had a look at. We had a look at 6 aspects of contemporary English, as I'd like to call them. And I think what we take away from this is that we can't limit contemporary English to just vocabulary. We do need to look at other things like English as a lingua franca, as one aspect of contemporary English. We need to think about youth language and non-standard forms of grammar. These are some of the language areas that we will be investigating further over the next 5 weeks. And what we notice, as we saw with Word of the Year that you did in the breakout room, is how much language and the world around it are symbiotic. Words and phrases don't exist in a cultural vacuum. And here in the UK, so much of our new language comes from the influence of both highbrow and popular culture. And on this note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Liz Harrison. Thank you.
I'd like to just say that we'll be having a discussion later on Facebook about some of these issues. Okay, I wonder if your language or languages that you speak are changing in similar ways. That would be interesting to explore. Okay.